I wanted to have this dialogue because I'm often asked, Scala's mission is to promote liberal arts education.
Right.
I'm often asked, what is a liberal arts education? And I tend to answer, well, that term gets used to actually refer to slightly different models of education, one of which I think you described as the St. John's model, reading the great books of the humanities, philosophy, literature, etc. That's wonderful. That's an excellent education. Liberal arts can also mean the quadrivium and the trivium, right? So an understanding, and I'd say this might be how John Henry Newman uses the term liberal arts. Our minds are shaped in different ways by encountering mathematics, grammar, natural science, right? So liberal arts also means exposing the mind to the primary ways of knowing. Some people use liberal arts to mean an education in Christian formation or in a religious, holistic sense. And then finally, and this is where I want our dialogue to go, I think a perhaps less understood education of what a liberal arts model of education can be is the integration of beauty into learning. And so this is why I wanted to have the dialogue with you. And you yourself already told us that you had a great books education, which is extremely valuable. And you were also a musician doing the fine arts. So I wanted to then kind of maybe open up the dialogue by talking about sort of why do we need beauty in education at all? What is the relationship between the fine arts and the liberal arts and educating the whole person?
Yeah, those are all really very important questions. I think I typically start when I'm talking about the liberal arts with people. I do tend to start with the quadrivium and the trivium as a sort of a fourfold path and a threefold path, as Boethius understood them, to get to philosophy and this higher vision. We often use here at the college, maybe because we're on a mountain, we often use the image of, and we took this from Newman, but the idea that you grow up in a town, perhaps next to a mountain, and you live in the town, you know the town very well, and all of its details and its textures. But one day you climb that mountain, and then you see the town from a completely different viewpoint. And you see the mountain, you see the town, but you also see other mountains in the distance and other towns, and the horizon is broad. And that vision is in some sense, as much of the whole as you can contain. But then when you come back down and you return to your town, your view of reality in the place you thought you knew is radically different. And that's part of the vision of liberal education. And so the trivium and the quadrivium are, if you will, paths up the mountain. But Aristotle said that all men desire to know. And if knowledge is, and the truth of knowledge is rooted in being, then and in being is also related to goodness and beauty, then you might, I think, could make the case that all men also desire to experience beauty. And that's a fundamentally human need. And so a truly liberal education, an education that truly liberates us, is going to integrate not only the trivium and the quadrivium, but also opportunities to experience beauty and perhaps also to make beauty. And so there can become a deep integration. And so much of liberal education is about helping people to become fully human. And so I think that this is an essential part of that anthropology. And I think it integrates the great books approach. It integrates Newman's approach, the classical Boethian approach as well. And beauty cuts across, because you mentioned I studied music, and I mentioned that a little while ago as well. Music is part of the quadrivium as a mathematical discipline. But then as a fine art, it also cuts across into the beautiful. And it integrates both of those at a very deep level. So yes, the fine arts absolutely must have a place, I think, in truly liberal education.
Recently I've been reading and also listening to Dana Gioia. He is a poet, a former business person, former director of the National Endowment of the Humanities, and a writer of many poems. And he said recently on an interview he did with the Trinity Forum, which I recommend our listeners look into on YouTube, he had this powerful way of expressing about kind of that beauty is so important because it's like arrests our attention. It gets us to take pleasure in what we're beholding, and then helps us get kind of an inner glimpse of the workings of nature. But along the lines of what you just said about this image of ascending a mountain, he also drew on Aquinas to say that one of the things that beauty does is it helps us integrate the different parts that we're seeing into a whole. right? So I think anyone listening has had an experience on a mountain or in a beautiful piece of nature where you feel like this enlightenment, where suddenly all these different pieces of knowledge come together and you can see the whole, right? So beauty helps give us this clarity. It radiates into our intelligence. And part of the reason I think beauty is so important to liberal arts education today is precisely because students tell me again and again that their educational experiences are fragmenting. They're picking up pieces of knowledge, but they're not getting a glimpse of the beauty that integrates all of the little things they're learning into a whole. I wrote about this in one of the articles I published in Church Life Journal called The Love of Learning and the Lay Desire for God, drawing on the book of the Benedictine Jean Leclerc with the title The Love of Learning that you mentioned. So I wondered if you could just say a little bit more about this model of education that you're drawing on, that certainly respects the Research One model and the scholastic model, but this model, this kind of pre-scholastic, you might want to call it, model of education, where beauty is central to integrating different knowledge, different aspects of knowledge.
Sure, sure. And I think there are a couple steps to this process. If you think about our experience of visual beauty or musical beauty, I think we can develop habits of mind that and ways of thinking that are then transferable to other parts of our lives and even to our life as a whole. When you're really getting to know a piece of classical music, you soon become very attentive to the relationships between parts and wholes, the parts to each other. I'm thinking of, say, a sonata form, and you've got the exposition, the development, the recapitulation. You've got themes. You've got multiple things unfolding and happening at one time. And any real understanding of that work is going to require you to do an analysis and to bring those things to the surface. But at a certain point, you return and you create a synthesis that is very textured and multidimensional. And then you go back to listen to that anew as it unfolds through time. So you've got these habits of mind, the analysis, the synthesis, the parts and the wholes, a kind of dialogue within these various features of the work, and it's all ordered to a teleology, to that moment near the end where things come together in a deeply satisfying way. Now, it's possible to do this kind of work and just keep it in isolation and not let it affect the rest of your life. But in our educational model, that work, which we do primarily with text as well as music and art, but that practice of thinking teleologically, that practice of thinking in terms of parts and wholes, we then encourage students to think about their own lives and the larger reality in those terms. What are the parts and wholes within our own lives? What is our own telos as a human person? What are we aiming at? And poetry also plays a big role in here. And I'm indebted to Dr. Mary Mumbach, who's on our faculty, and Louise Cowan at the University of Dallas. I'm just beginning to understand many of their insights. But there is an irreducibility to poetry. And I think there's an irreducibility to life. And for the students to be able to have this experience through liberal learning, in which they realize that sometimes you can't cross all the T's and dot all the I's. There are just parts of life that are irreducible. Poetry can actually teach us to encounter and embrace and live with and through these moments of real life. So I think through the fine arts, both the visual, the musical, but also through poetry, it really can prepare us. And then if you think about transferring those things to the realm of politics, it can really kind of inoculate you against certain forms of ideology when you learn to think in terms of those complex structures and the irreducibility of human life. So, and yet the culture is fed for us through the cultus, through the worship, through the liturgical life. So it's a beautiful whole. It's not a Gothic cathedral. It's something a little more modest, but it really does prepare students to encounter life in a fully human way.